Now, these kinds of callings into ministry happen throughout the Bible. Jesus called his disciples. He said, "Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men." And they left their nets and they followed him. Elisha just does it a little different. Will you take the mantle of leadership? I know that I've experienced a calling into ministry as well. For me, it happened when I was 19 years old. Summer that I was 19 years old, I went up to this camp in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And one of the messages that a guy gave was a very simple message. It went something like this. Jesus tells us that we're supposed to pray that the Lord of the harvest will send workers out into the harvest field. So I want you all to go out and spend the next 30 minutes out in your favorite prayer place and pray that the Lord of the harvest will send workers out into the harvest field. So I'm a good little obedient student. I take my little, blankie and put it out behind cabin 10 where I like to pray, sit down on it, and I start 30 minutes. Dear Lord, please send workers out into the harvest field. Dear Lord, please send workers out into the harvest field. Please send workers out into the harvest field. Like 29 minutes left. What am I going to do? And at that point, I said, okay, I guess I'll just sit here and wait and listen to what God has to say. And it was the first time in my life where I really sensed God speaking, not in an audible voice, but just as clear in my soul. It was like God was saying, well, Mark, what about you? I'm like, oh, no, God, not me. I just go to a secular university. That's reserved for kids who have Bible training, right? God says, don't you think I'm bigger than that? I said, all right, well, this is, the kind of thing going into the harvest field. That's like for missionaries who go where lost people are. What kind of a harvest field do I have? And it's like God was saying, well, you have 30 guys within 50 feet of your dorm floor door. I'm like, oh yeah, that is a harvest field, isn't it? And every step that I went through, every excuse that I had, it was like God was saying, you don't have an excuse. I'm bigger than that. And so that was the time where I said, yes, God, I will go into ministry. And the ministry that I was called to was not full-time vocational pastoral ministry. It was ministry to 30 guys on a dorm floor. And over the next 3 years, I got to see about 15 guys come to faith in Christ in my little harvest field that I was a part of. It was exciting days for me. But you know what's really interesting about that is that after that moment, I never really got another call into full-time vocational pastoral ministry from God. That brings comfort, doesn't it? And when I went to my licensing interview for the Christian Missionary Alliance, where they're saying, tell us about your call to full-time vocational ministry, I was like, I had to just make up a story. No, I did not make up a story about that. I just told them my cabin 10 story. And it was good enough to pass because these guys were smart enough to know that this is the way God usually works. I mean, sometimes people get that call to be a pastor. Sometimes it creates a change in vocation or education. But for most people, the call to ministry is a call to ministry right where you're at. Right where you're at. I think that's the call that God has on your life this morning. God calls people where they are most of the time. So if you're a student at the university or you're headed out to the university, this is ministry. If you're a teacher with 30 snot-nosed, German-fested, hyperactive second graders, this is ministry. If you're a business guy who sits on boards around the city, this is ministry. If you're a woman who cuts hair and talks to her clients about life, this is ministry. If you're a mom who stays home with 2 active preschoolers, hangs out at the playground with other moms, and manages the operations of your domestic kingdom, this is ministry. Now, don't get me wrong. There are ways to do all of these things without being in ministry. But when God calls you to follow Jesus, whatever you're doing becomes the ministry that He's called you to. So what are your excuses? I know I had my long list of excuses for God. And in time, as I read through the Bible, I learned that guys in the Bible had their list of excuses too. Most all of them had a reason why they could say no to ministry. Joseph, Old Testament Joseph, he had been bullied. Noah got drunk. Jonah ran the other way. Moses couldn't talk clearly. David was too young. Abraham was too old. Peter had no education. Matthew had a bad reputation. Mary Magdalene had demons in her. Like, you think you've got an excuse to not do ministry? Paul had been jailing Christians, and John the Baptist, well, he was just plain weird. Now, all these things could have kept someone from ministry. But you see, God calls people with baggage, incompetence, and inadequate training. God calls weak people. That way, everybody knows that God gets the credit. You ever thought about why God does that? Because if you're a superstar, everyone says, hey, that guy's a superstar. But if you're a dodo head and God uses you, people go, wow, that must be from God.